The police officer stood on my front porch, his hand resting on his radio as Karen Mitchell pointed an accusing finger at me through my own living room window. Her voice carried across my perfectly manicured lawn like a battle cry. "Officer, this man is trespassing on private property. He has been harassing our neighborhood for months, and I demand you remove him immediately." I watched from inside my own home as she handed the officer a manila folder thick with what she called evidence. My hands trembled as I realized the depth of her delusion. For 6 months, this woman had made my life a living nightmare. 6 months of violation notices, harassment, and racial profiling disguised as neighborhood watch. But as I reached for my property deed to prove my ownership, a cold smile spread across my face. You see, Karen Mitchell had no idea that while she was trying to destroy my life, she had been living in a house that I owned. The foreclosure papers sitting on my desk belonged to her address. The same woman demanding my eviction was about to lose her own home. That is when I realized the sweet taste of irony was about to become the most satisfying revenge of my entire life. My name is Marcus Thompson, and 3 months ago I purchased my dream home in Willowbrook Estates, one of the most exclusive gated communities in the suburbs. After 15 years of building my tech consulting business from the ground up, I finally had enough success to afford the life I had always imagined. The neighborhood looked like something straight out of a magazine. Every lawn was perfectly trimmed, every driveway spotless, and every house painted in tasteful earth tones that probably required HOA approval. BMW sedans and Mercedes SUVs lined the driveways like status symbols in a suburban showroom. I spent my first week exploring the community, introducing myself to neighbors during my morning jogs. Most people seemed polite enough, though I noticed the way conversations would pause when I approached, followed by forced smiles and careful questions about where I came from and what I did for work. The house itself was everything I had dreamed of. 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, a home office with floor-to-ceiling windows, and a backyard that overlooked the community pond. I set up my workspace immediately, conducting client calls while watching ducks swim past my window. My daily routine was simple and peaceful. Morning jogs around the community trails, 8 hours of work in my home office, and evenings spent maintaining my property with the same attention to detail I applied to everything in my life. I pressure washed my driveway weekly, kept my grass at exactly 2.5 inches, and made sure my garbage cans were stored out of sight within 30 minutes of pickup. Everything changed during my second week when I met Karen Mitchell, the HOA president. She appeared at my front door on a Tuesday morning wearing a crisp white blouse and khaki pants, carrying a leather portfolio like she was conducting official business. "Good morning, I am Karen Mitchell, president of the Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association. I wanted to personally welcome you to our community." Her smile seemed practiced, professional, but her eyes were doing something different. They were cataloging everything about me, from my Tesla in the driveway to the designer watch on my wrist. "Thank you, Mrs. Mitchell. I am Marcus Thompson. I have to say, this neighborhood is even more beautiful than I imagined." "Yes, well, we work very hard to maintain certain standards here. Tell me, Mr. Thompson, what line of work are you in?" The question felt loaded, like she was trying to solve a puzzle that did not make sense to her. I explained my consulting business, the corporate clients, the years of building my reputation in the tech industry. She nodded along, but I could see the skepticism in her expression. "How fascinating, and you are able to afford a home in Willowbrook through consulting." The way she said consulting made it sound like I had claimed to be a professional unicorn trainer. I remained polite, explaining that success in technology could be quite lucrative when you specialized in cybersecurity for Fortune 500 companies. Well, I do hope you will find our community guidelines helpful in maintaining the property values we all work so hard to protect. I will have a copy of our HOA handbook delivered later today. As she walked away, I noticed her glancing back at my house, at my car, at me standing in the doorway of what was clearly my own home. Something in her expression told me this conversation was not really about welcoming me to the neighborhood. That night, I stood in my home office looking out at the peaceful community pond, thinking about how hard I had worked to reach this moment. I had no idea that Corinne Mitchell was already planning to make my life miserable, one violation notice at a time. 3 weeks later, I found the first violation notice tucked under my windshield wiper like a parking ticket. My hands shook as I read the official letterhead. Willowbrook Estates HOA Property Violation Notice. The complaint was absurd. According to Corinne Mitchell, my Tesla was parked in violation of community standards because it extended beyond the acceptable parking zone of my driveway. I walked around my car 3 times, measuring the distance from my garage to the street. My vehicle was parked exactly where every other car in the neighborhood was parked. I spent that evening reading every page of the HOA handbook, highlighting parking regulations with a yellow marker. The rules were clear. Vehicles could be parked anywhere on the property owner's driveway as long as they did not extend into the street or block sidewalk access. My Tesla was at least 3 feet from both. The monthly HOA meeting was held in the community center, a beige building that smelled like coffee and institutional carpet. I arrived 15 minutes early, carrying a folder with photographs of my driveway, measurements, and highlighted sections of the parking regulations. Corinne Mitchell sat behind a folding table at the front of the room like a judge presiding over a courtroom. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and she wore reading glasses that she peered over when scanning the room. 15 other residents sat in metal folding chairs, most of them looking like they would rather be anywhere else. "We have one item of new business tonight. Mr. Thompson, please approach the front." I walked to the front of the room feeling like a defendant in traffic court. Corinne shuffled through papers in her folder, taking her time to build dramatic tension. "Mr. Thompson, you received a violation notice regarding improper vehicle parking. Do you have a response?" I opened my folder and began presenting my evidence. Photographs showed my Tesla parked identically to every other vehicle in the neighborhood. Measurements proved I was well within the legal parking zone. The HOA handbook clearly supported my position. Corinne listened with the expression of someone watching paint dry. When I finished my presentation, she removed her glasses and sighed dramatically. "Mr. Thompson, while your research is thorough, you seem to be missing the point. This community has standards. We have worked very hard to create an environment where property values remain high and residents feel comfortable." "I understand that, Mrs. Mitchell, but according to your own regulations, my parking is completely compliant." "Compliance is not just about following the letter of the law, Mr. Thompson. It is about understanding the spirit of community living. Some residents have expressed concern about vehicles that seem excessive for our neighborhood character." The room fell silent. I could feel every pair of eyes watching this exchange, waiting to see how I would respond to what was clearly a personal attack disguised as community policy. "Are you saying that my car is too expensive for this neighborhood?" "I am saying that some residents feel uncomfortable when neighbors appear to be showing off their wealth inappropriately. Perhaps a more modest vehicle would better fit our community standards. My blood pressure spiked, but I forced myself to remain calm and professional. I looked around the room at the other residents, hoping someone would speak up about the obvious discrimination taking place. Instead, I saw people studying their shoes, checking their phones, avoiding eye contact at all costs. Mrs. Mitchell, I purchased my vehicle with money I earned through 15 years of hard work. I park it on my own property in compliance with all HOA regulations. I fail to see how my choice of transportation affects anyone else in this community. Karen put her glasses back on and made a note in her folder. Mr. Thompson, I am issuing you a formal warning about community compliance. Future violations will result in fines and potential legal action. Meeting adjourned. I walked out of that community center knowing that Karen Mitchell had just declared war on me. But I also knew that I was not going to be intimidated by a woman who hid her prejudice behind community standards and property values. That night, I started a documentation file. If Karen Mitchell wanted to play games with violation notices and harassment, I was going to make sure every single interaction was recorded, photographed, and legally documented. I had no idea that this was only the beginning of her campaign to drive me out of my own neighborhood. The second violation notice arrived 2 weeks later, this time claiming my grass was too long. I walked around my lawn with a tape measure, checking the height at random spots. Every measurement came in at exactly 2.5 inches, well within the HOA requirement of 3 inches or less. The third notice accused me of improper mailbox positioning. According to Karen, my mailbox extended too far into the street right-of way. I hired a surveyor to measure the exact property boundaries and confirmed that my mailbox was positioned identically to every other mailbox on the street. By the end of my second month in Willowbrook Estates, I had received 7 violation notices for increasingly ridiculous infractions. My holiday decorations were allegedly installed too early, even though they went up the same weekend as my neighbors. My garbage can was supposedly left at the curb too long, despite being collected within 20 minutes of the pickup truck leaving my street. Each violation came with photographs that seemed to contradict reality. Karen would submit pictures that made my perfectly maintained lawn look shaggy, or captured my mailbox from angles that suggested improper positioning. It was like living in a funhouse mirror where everything I saw was distorted into evidence of wrongdoing. I decided to consult with an attorney who specialized in HOA disputes. Jennifer Martinez had been practicing community association law for 12 years, and her office walls were covered with certificates and awards from successful cases. Mr. Thompson, I have reviewed your file, and I have to say, this is one of the most systematic harassment campaigns I have ever seen. These violations are not legitimate enforcement actions. They are personal attacks disguised as community management. Can we stop her legally? Jennifer leaned back in her chair, studying the stack of violation notices spread across her desk. Karen Mitchell has significant influence over the HOA board and even some connections with local code enforcement. She has been doing this long enough to know how to operate within legal boundaries while making your life miserable. So what are my options? Document everything. Keep fighting every violation. Eventually, we might be able to prove a pattern of discriminatory enforcement. But I have to warn you, this could take months or even years to resolve. The isolation was becoming unbearable. My attempts to build friendships with neighbors were met with polite excuses and canceled invitations. The couple next door stopped returning my waves during morning jogs. The family across the street suddenly discovered urgent indoor activities whenever I appeared in my front yard. I learned the truth about Karen's gossip campaign during a chance encounter at the grocery store. Mrs. Patterson, an elderly woman from the end of my street, accidentally revealed the rumors being spread about me. I just do not understand how someone so young can afford such an expensive house. Karen says there might be something suspicious about your income source. Drug dealing or money laundering, perhaps. My hands clenched around my shopping cart handle as the full scope of Karen's character assassination became clear. She was not just targeting my property maintenance. She was systematically destroying my reputation and credibility throughout the entire community. The harassment escalated when Karen began scheduling surprise property inspections. She would appear at my door with a clipboard and camera, claiming to investigate neighbor complaints about noise, odors, or suspicious activity. These inspections always seemed to happen during my most important client calls. Mr. Thompson, we have received reports of unusual activity at your residence. I need to conduct a visual inspection of your property for compliance verification. What kind of unusual activity? Frequent visitors, loud music, strange odors. Several neighbors have expressed concern. I knew these complaints were fabricated because I worked alone from my home office, rarely played music above conversation level, and my visitors consisted of the occasional delivery driver. But Karen would walk around my property taking photographs, making notes, creating an official record of investigations into non-existent problems. The final straw came when I realized Karen was documenting my daily activities in a detailed log. I discovered this during one of her inspections when she dropped a notebook filled with handwritten observations about my schedule, my visitors, and even my clothing choices. Monday, 8:15 a.m. Subject departed for morning jog wearing red athletic wear. Tuesday, 2:30 p.m. Subject received package delivery, appeared agitated during interaction with driver. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. If Karen Mitchell wanted to investigate me, I was going to return the favor. I hired a private investigator to research her background, her finances, and her own compliance with community standards. I had no idea that this investigation would reveal the most shocking irony of my entire life. Karen escalated her harassment campaign to official government channels during my third month in Willowbrook Estates. I arrived home from a client meeting to find a city code enforcement officer measuring my lawn with official equipment. "Sir, we received complaints about property maintenance violations. I need to conduct a comprehensive inspection of your residence and grounds." The inspector spent 2 hours examining every inch of my property, from my perfectly trimmed hedges to my spotless driveway. His final report concluded that my property was in excellent condition with zero violations of any city codes or regulations. "Ma'am, I have to tell you, this is one of the most well-maintained properties I have inspected this year. Whoever filed these complaints was wasting city resources." Karen stood in my driveway holding a manila folder thick with photographs and documentation, her face red with embarrassment and anger. "Officer, there must be some mistake. This property has numerous violations that affect our entire neighborhood." "Ma'am, I found zero violations. I suggest you resolve your neighborhood disputes through proper HOA channels rather than involving city enforcement." 2 days later, Karen organized a neighborhood petition demanding my eviction for disturbing the peace and negatively impacting property values. She went door to door collecting signatures, presenting fabricated evidence of my supposed misconduct to anyone willing to listen. I watched from my office window as she spent 3 hours walking through the community with her clipboard and petition forms. The sight of my neighbors signing documents demanding my removal felt like being convicted of crimes I had never committed. The breaking point came on a Saturday afternoon while I was working in my backyard garden. I had spent the morning planting tomatoes and herbs in raised beds along my back fence, enjoying the peaceful silence of suburban weekend life. "Sir, please step away from the property and keep your hands visible." I looked up from my tomato plants to see two police officers standing at my back gate. Behind them, Corinne Mitchell pointed at me like she was identifying a criminal in a lineup. "Officers, this man has been trespassing on this property for months. He claims to be the homeowner, but I have serious doubts about his legal right to be here." My gardening gloves were covered in soil, my knees were dirty from kneeling in the flower bed, and I was holding a small shovel like evidence of some crime. The officers approached me with their hands resting on their duty belts. "Sir, do you have identification and proof that you have permission to be on this property?" The question hit me like a physical blow. I was standing in my own backyard, on property I had purchased with my own money, being questioned by police at the request of a woman who was systematically harassing me based on racial assumptions. "Officers, this is my house. I am the legal owner of this property." I walked slowly toward my back door, keeping my hands visible as requested, while Corinne continued her performance behind the officers. "He has been claiming ownership for months, but something about his story does not add up. Young black man, expensive house, claims to work in technology. I think you should investigate his source of income." My hands trembled as I retrieved my property deed, mortgage documents, and driver's license from my home office. The officers examined my paperwork carefully while Corinne stood behind them looking frustrated that her plan was not working. "Sir, everything appears to be in order. You are clearly the legal owner of this property." One of the officers turned to Corinne with an expression of barely controlled annoyance. "Ma'am, this man has provided clear documentation of ownership. Filing false reports with police is a serious offense." "But officers, there has to be some mistake. People like him do not just buy houses in neighborhoods like this." The racist statement hung in the air like poison gas. Even the police officers looked uncomfortable with Corinne's explicit prejudice. I stood in my own backyard, holding the deed to my own house, while a woman who lived 3 blocks away questioned my right to exist in my own neighborhood. That evening, I sat in my home office staring at the police report from the incident. The officers had been professional and fair, but the humiliation of being questioned about my right to stand in my own garden was beyond anything I had ever experienced. I made a decision that night that would change everything. Corinne Mitchell had pushed me past my breaking point with months of harassment, false accusations, and systematic attempts to destroy my life. If she wanted to investigate me, I was going to investigate her right back. I called my private investigator and authorized a comprehensive background check on Corinne Mitchell, her finances, her legal history, and her own compliance with community standards. I had no idea that this investigation would reveal the most shocking irony of my entire life. My private investigator, David Chen, had spent 15 years uncovering secrets for divorce attorneys and corporate clients. He specialized in financial investigations and had a reputation for finding information that other people preferred to keep hidden. "Mr. Thompson, I have some very interesting findings about Corinne Mitchell. You might want to sit down for this conversation." David spread a collection of documents across my dining room table like he was laying out evidence for a courtroom presentation. Bank statements, property records, court filings, and mortgage documents painted a picture of financial desperation that I had never suspected. Corinne Mitchell is facing foreclosure on her home. She has been in default on her mortgage payments for 6 months, and the bank has initiated legal proceedings to repossess the property. I stared at the foreclosure documents, trying to process this information. The woman who had been harassing me about property values and community standards was about to lose her own house to financial failure. There is more, Mr. Thompson. The really interesting part is who owns her mortgage. David pulled out a property ownership document that made my blood run cold. The house at 1247 Maple Street, Corinne Mitchell's address, was owned by Thompson Holdings, LLC, the investment company I had established 5 years earlier to manage my real estate portfolio. I do not understand. How is that possible? Your property management company, Premier Holdings, has been handling the foreclosure process. They purchased several distressed properties in Willowbrook Estates as investment opportunities. Corinne Mitchell's house was one of them. The irony was so perfect it felt like fiction. The woman who had spent months questioning my right to live in the neighborhood was actually living in a house that I owned. She was my tenant, facing eviction for non-payment of rent, while simultaneously trying to have me evicted from my own property. David, are you telling me that Corinne Mitchell is my tenant? Not exactly a tenant, but yes. Your investment company owns her house through a foreclosure purchase. She has been living there while the eviction process moves through the courts. I spent the next hour reviewing documents that revealed the full scope of Corinne's financial problems. Credit card debt, outstanding medical bills, a divorce settlement that had drained her savings, and a series of failed business ventures that had destroyed her credit rating. The mortgage default had started 8 months earlier, around the same time I had moved into the neighborhood. Corinne's aggressive behavior suddenly made sense. She was facing the loss of her home and social status, watching a successful black man move into her community while she was secretly falling apart financially. There is something else you should know, Mr. Thompson. Corinne is not the only resident facing financial problems. At least 4 other families in Willowbrook Estates are behind on their mortgages or facing foreclosure proceedings. This explained the silence during the HOA meetings, the reluctance of neighbors to oppose Corinne's authority, and the general atmosphere of fear that seemed to hang over community gatherings. People were terrified of losing their homes and social standing. I stayed awake that entire night, packing around my home office, trying to decide what to do with this information. Corinne Mitchell had made my life miserable for months based on racist assumptions about my success and belonging. Now, I held the power to make her homeless with a single phone call to my property management company. The moral weight of this decision was crushing. I could proceed with the eviction and watch Corinne lose everything, which would be justified revenge for months of harassment and discrimination. Or I could show mercy to a desperate woman whose prejudice stemmed from fear and financial desperation. I thought about my parents, who had taught me that true strength was measured by how you treated people when you had power over them. I thought about the example I wanted to set, the kind of man I wanted to be when faced with the opportunity for perfect revenge. But I also thought about the police encounter in my backyard, the violation notices, the systematic character assassination, and the months of isolation and humiliation that Corinne had inflicted on me without any mercy or consideration. By sunrise, I had made my decision. Corinne Mitchell was going to learn the truth about who she had been harassing, but the lesson was going to be delivered on my terms, not hers. I was going to confront her with the truth and give her a choice that would determine both of our futures. I called Corinne on Monday morning and requested a private meeting to discuss a resolution to our ongoing neighborhood conflict. My voice was calm and professional, giving no hint of what I had discovered about her financial situation. "Mr. Thompson, I am surprised you are finally ready to discuss your behavior. Perhaps you are beginning to understand that Willowbrook Estates has standards that must be maintained. Mrs. Mitchell, I think we need to have an honest conversation about what has been happening between us. Would you be available to meet at your house this evening?" She agreed immediately, probably expecting another opportunity to intimidate me into submission or convince me to leave the neighborhood voluntarily. I spent the afternoon organizing my documentation and rehearsing how I would reveal the truth. At 7 o'clock that evening, I stood on Corinne Mitchell's front porch holding a leather portfolio that contained months of evidence about her harassment campaign. The irony of the moment was not lost on me. I was visiting my own rental property to confront my tenant about her attempts to evict me from my own home. Corinne opened the door wearing a navy blue blazer and white blouse, dressed like she was conducting official HOA business. Her living room was decorated in beige and cream colors, with family photographs covering every surface and HOA documents spread across her coffee table. "Please sit down, Mr. Thompson. I have prepared some materials that I think will help you understand the seriousness of your situation." I sat on her cream-colored sofa while she positioned herself in a matching armchair, clearly intending to maintain a position of authority during our conversation. Her coffee table was covered with violation notices, photographs, and what appeared to be a timeline of my supposed misconduct. "Mrs. Mitchell, before we discuss my behavior, I would like to review your conduct over the past few months." I opened my portfolio and began presenting evidence of her harassment campaign. Copies of every violation notice, photographs proving my compliance with all HOA regulations, documentation of her false complaints to city enforcement, and records of her character assassination efforts throughout the neighborhood. Corinne listened with growing irritation, occasionally interrupting to defend her actions or question my evidence. Her confidence remained intact as she dismissed each item as either justified enforcement or necessary community protection. "Mr. Thompson, everything I have done has been in the best interests of this community. Your presence here has been disruptive from the beginning, and several residents have expressed serious concerns about your activities." "What activities specifically, Mrs. Mitchell?" "Well, there are questions about your income source, your frequent visitors, and your general attitude toward community standards." Her racist assumptions were becoming more explicit as her frustration grew. I could see the anger building behind her professional facade as she realized I was not going to be intimidated by her accusations. "Mrs. Mitchell, I have one simple question for you. Do you believe I have the right to live in this neighborhood?" "Mr. Thompson, anyone who can legitimately afford a home in Willowbrook Estates has the right to live here, but there are questions about whether your presence here is legitimate." That was the moment I decided to reveal the truth about her financial situation and my ownership of her house. I pulled out the foreclosure documents and placed them on her coffee table next to her violation notices. "Mrs. Mitchell, since you have questions about legitimacy, Let me ask you about your mortgage payments." Her face went pale as she recognized the legal documents. Her hands trembled as she picked up the foreclosure notice with her name and address clearly printed at the top. "Where did you get these documents?" "The same place I got the property ownership records showing that I own this house." The color drained completely from Corinne's face as I placed the deed and ownership documents on her coffee table. Her confident expression crumbled into confusion, then disbelief, then growing horror as she realized the implications. "That is impossible. I have lived in this house for 8 years. I bought it with my ex-husband during our marriage." "Mrs. Mitchell, you lost this house to foreclosure 6 months ago. My investment company purchased it through the bank seizure process. You have been living here as a tenant facing eviction for non-payment." Corinne stared at the documents like they were written in a foreign language. I watched her process the reality that the black man she had been trying to evict from the neighborhood was actually her landlord with the power to evict her from her own home. You own my house." "Yes, Mrs. Mitchell. For 6 months, you have been harassing your own landlord based on racist assumptions about my right to live in this community. While you were questioning my legitimacy, you were facing eviction from a house that I own." Corinne's reaction progressed through several stages of grief in real time. Denial, anger, bargaining, and finally, a desperate panic as she realized that her campaign of harassment had been directed at the one person who controlled her housing security. "Mr. Thompson, there has to be some mistake. Please tell me there has been some kind of mistake." The woman who had spent months trying to destroy my life was now begging me for mercy in her own living room. The perfect irony of the situation was almost too much to process. Corinne Mitchell sat in stunned silence for several minutes, staring at the ownership documents spread across her coffee table. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Mr. Thompson, I had no idea. The foreclosure, the ownership transfer, I never made the connection. Please, you have to understand, I was just trying to protect our community." "Mrs. Mitchell, protecting the community from what exactly?" "From a successful black man who maintains his property better than most of his neighbors." The direct confrontation with her racism seemed to break something inside Corinne. Her professional facade completely collapsed, and for the first time, I saw her as a desperate woman facing the loss of everything she had built her identity around. I was scared. My divorce, the financial problems, watching my whole life fall apart while you moved in with your expensive car and perfect house. It just did not seem fair. So you decided to make my life miserable because you were jealous of my success. I do not know. I was angry and scared, and you were an easy target. I am so sorry, Mr. Thompson. I know that does not excuse what I did, but I am truly sorry." I had prepared for this moment, but hearing Corinne's confession and apology felt strange after months of harassment and discrimination. Part of me wanted to proceed with the eviction immediately, to let her experience the homelessness and humiliation she had tried to inflict on me. But I also recognized an opportunity to create something positive from this situation, to demonstrate that strength and character were measured by how you treated people when you had power over them. "Mrs. Mitchell, I am going to give you a choice. You can face immediate eviction and legal consequences for your harassment campaign, or you can accept my terms for remaining in this house." Corinne looked up with desperate hope in her eyes. "What are your terms?" "First, you will resign from the HOA board immediately and publicly apologize to me and the entire community for your discriminatory behavior. Second, you will work with me to reform the HOA policies to focus on actual community building rather than exclusionary enforcement. Third, you will pay your rent on time and treat me with the same respect you would show any other landlord. Corinne nodded frantically, accepting my terms without hesitation. Yes, absolutely. Whatever you want, Mr. Thompson. I will do anything to make this right. 2 weeks later, I organized a special community meeting in the same room where Corinne had first accused me of improper parking. This time, I stood at the front table while Corinne sat with the other residents, preparing to deliver the most difficult speech of her life. Neighbors, I have called this meeting to address some serious issues that have affected our community over the past few months. Mrs. Mitchell has something important to tell all of you. Corinne stood slowly, her hands shaking as she approached the microphone. The same woman who had commanded this room with authority and prejudice now looked small and vulnerable. I owe all of you, especially Mr. Thompson, a sincere apology. For months, I have been harassing Mr. Thompson based on racist assumptions about his right to live in our community. I questioned his success, investigated his background, and tried to drive him away because I could not accept that a black man belonged in Willowbrook Estates. The room was completely silent as Corinne continued her confession. Several neighbors looked uncomfortable, probably recognizing their own complicity in the harassment campaign. I also need to confess that my behavior was driven by my own financial problems and jealousy of Mr. Thompson's success. I have been facing foreclosure on my home, and instead of dealing with my problems responsibly, I lashed out at an innocent neighbor who represented everything I was afraid of losing. Corinne's voice broke as she delivered the final part of her apology. Mr. Thompson had every right to have me evicted from my home and prosecuted for harassment. Instead, he has shown me mercy and given me an opportunity to make things right. I resigned my position as HOA president, and I promise to work with all of you to create a more inclusive and welcoming community. 6 months later, I stood in my backyard garden, harvesting tomatoes and peppers from the raised beds that had been the scene of my most humiliating encounter with police. The neighborhood felt completely different now, with genuine friendships replacing the superficial politeness that had masked so much fear and prejudice. Corinne had kept her word, paying her rent on time and working with me to implement new HOA policies focused on community events and neighbor support rather than enforcement and exclusion. She had also started a neighborhood support group for residents facing financial difficulties, turning her personal crisis into an opportunity to help others. The experience taught me that sometimes the most powerful response to hatred and discrimination is not revenge, but the kind of strategic mercy that forces people to confront their own prejudices and grow from the experience. True justice is not about destroying your enemies, but about creating the possibility for understanding and redemption.